Rain fell like a steady drumbeat against the corrugated rooftops of the city. Neon lights flickered in the puddles, fragmented and trembling, as if the night itself feared what was coming. In the shadows of an alley, a man sat slumped against the cold brick wall, his hoodie soaked, hands trembling, and eyes fixed on the ground. His name was Ryu Hayashi. At 28, he had the strength of a fighter but carried the weight of someone who had been defeated too many times. By life, by fear, by himself. Ryu wasn't always like this. There was a time when his heart beat with purpose, when each breath was full of hope. But fear, quiet, patient, invisible, had crept in. It had taken over the corners of his life, whispering doubts when he was alone, paralyzing him when decisions mattered, keeping him from the people he loved, and from the life he wanted. Fear had become a shadow that followed him, and no matter how hard he ran, it was always there, waiting. Tonight, he was afraid again. But this fear was different. It wasn't just the fear of failure, or fear of judgment. It was the fear of what might happen if he stayed frozen, if he never fought back. He had lost everything that mattered to him. His father, a man of discipline and honor, had passed when Ryu was 19. His mother, fragile from grief, retreated into silence. Friends had drifted away, scared of the man he had become. And he had failed himself. He closed his eyes, memories flooding back, his father's deep voice in the dojo, echoing lessons that now felt like distant whispers. Control your body, Ryu. Control your mind. Control your fear, and nothing can touch you. The words had felt impossible then. Impossible to understand. Impossible to live. He had walked away from martial arts, from discipline, from any chance of strength, because fear had told him he wasn't enough. But tonight the fear was different. Tonight, it was a challenge, a storm, a weight on his chest that refused to lift. And deep inside, buried under years of doubt, something stirred, a fragile spark. He remembered the first time he had heard about the Bujinkan System. It had been years ago, a whisper from a stranger in a park. A quiet man, older, with eyes that seemed to look straight into your soul, had told him. The Bujinkan is not just about fighting. It is about understanding fear, controlling it, and moving through it. Your enemy is not outside. You know this, do you not? It is within. Ryu had dismissed the words then. He had laughed, hiding the truth. He had no control, not of his body, not of his mind, not of the terror that had begun to rule him. But the memory returned now with startling clarity. He was tired of running. Tired of watching life happen from the sidelines, of letting his own doubts dictate his path. And in that moment, soaked in rain and despair, he made a choice. He would find the Bujinkan dojo. He would face the fear that had haunted him for years. And he would fight, not to hurt someone else, but to reclaim the life he had lost, piece by piece. The next morning, the city woke to a thin fog. Ryu stood at the foot of the dojo steps, hands in his pockets, heart hammering in his chest like a drum of war. The building was old, wooden, with sliding doors that creaked as if protesting his presence. The air smelled faintly of incense and sweat, discipline, struggle, and history. A man approached. His hair was streaked with gray, his posture calm but commanding. The kind of presence that made you want to either hide or follow. You're here for the Bujinkan, he said. Voice low, steady, almost like a river moving through rocks. Ryu nodded. His throat was dry. Words failed him. Good. Fear brought you here, the man continued. Fear is your teacher, if you allow it to be. But only those who step forward, even when their legs shake, even when their mind screams to flee, can learn to control it. Ryu swallowed hard. He didn't understand everything yet. How could someone possibly control fear that had taken years to build? And yet, something in the man's calm eyes made him believe it was possible. The training began slowly. At first, it was humiliating. Simple movements seemed impossible. His body was stiff, uncooperative. His mind screamed, "You can't do this. You're too weak." And every time, the master's gaze was unyielding, silent, testing him, forcing him to confront the truth. The only battle worth fighting was inside himself. Days turned into weeks. Ryu fell, failed, and faltered more times than he could count. Sweat, bruises, aching muscles, all became familiar companions. And yet, something remarkable happened. With every failure, every small victory, the fear began to change. It was no longer a prison. It became a signal, a guide, a teacher. It whispered where he needed to grow, where he needed to focus, where he had to summon courage he didn't know he possessed. But the path was not linear. One evening, during a solo practice in the dimly lit dojo, the master stopped him mid-movement. "Why do you fight?" he asked. Ryu paused, chest heaving. I want to be free. Free of fear. Free of everything I've lost." The master shook his head slowly. "You think freedom comes from fighting the world? It does not. Freedom comes from facing what is inside you. You cannot destroy fear by running or hiding. You destroy it by stepping into it, by breathing it, by becoming something larger than it." Ryu's hands shook. The words pierced deeper than any punch, deeper than any fall. He realized, truly realized, that fear wasn't the enemy, it was a mirror. And until he could look into it without flinching, he would never be free. That night, alone in his small apartment, he stared at his reflection. Rain streaked against the window, mirroring the chaos inside. He clenched his fists, imagining the fear that had held him for so long. And for the first time, he didn't run. He didn't hide. He faced it. The feeling was overwhelming, almost unbearable. But then, amidst the storm of doubt and panic, a strange calm settled in his chest. A whisper of possibility. A sense that maybe, just maybe, he could survive this. And more than survive, he could rise. But just as hope began to flicker, his phone buzzed. A message from an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. The message was short, chilling. "Ryu, I need your help. They're coming. They know about you." Ryu froze. The room seemed to shrink. Fear surged, raw and immediate. But beneath it, something else, the spark that had been ignited in the dojo, burned brighter. He knew now that his fight was not just about himself. It was about stepping fully into the storm, about confronting fear not as a shadow, but as a force to master. And in that moment, standing at the crossroads of dread and courage, Ryu made a choice. He would not hide. He would not flee. He would face whatever came, because fear, for the first time in his life, would not control him. And as he stepped into the night, rain dripping from his hair and hoodie, he felt it. The first real pulse of power that comes from embracing fear instead of running from it. Somewhere in the darkness, danger waited. But Ryu no longer trembled. He had begun the path to something greater, and nothing, not even fear, could stop him now. The night air was thick with tension as Ryu stepped onto the wet streets, each footfall echoing in the empty alleys. The city was alive in a low, ominous hum, sirens wailing in the distance, the faint hiss of neon signs, the occasional clatter of a shuttered storefront. But Ryu felt none of it. His mind was focused, his senses sharp, tuned by weeks of grueling Bujinkan training. Every muscle in his body hummed with awareness. Every instinct screamed alert. The message from his old friend, Hiroshi, burned in his thoughts. "They're coming. They know about you." The words were vague, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. Whoever they were dangerous, organized, and relentless. And Ryu knew one thing clearly. Running was no longer an option. He arrived at a deserted park where he and Hiroshi had trained as teenagers. The swings swayed slowly in the wind, creaking like whispers of the past. Memories hit him unbidden, laughter, shared secrets. A world before fear had wrapped itself around him like chains. But there was no time for nostalgia. A shadow detached itself from the darkness. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with deliberate caution. Hiroshi. Relief washed over Ryu, quickly replaced by the knot of tension in his chest. Hiroshi's face was pale, tight with fear, and his voice came out low. "Hurry. They know you're here. They've been watching. If you go back unprepared, you won't make it." Ryu nodded silently. He could feel the fear beginning to coil in his stomach, but instead of panicking, he breathed. In, out, slow and steady. The lessons of the dojo came alive in him. fear is not to be erased. It is to be met and moved through. Hiroshi led him to a narrow alley behind the park, where faint graffiti peeled from the walls and the smell of damp concrete lingered. They're part of a syndicate. They target people like us, people who can't be controlled. Hiroshi's voice wavered. They want to break you, Ryu. And they will use everything you love against you. Ryu's chest tightened. Images flashed unbidden, his mother's fragile smile, memories of his father's teachings, the dojo, his first victories, his first failures, all mingled with the fear of loss, of failure, of repeating past mistakes. Then we stop running, he said, voice firm, carrying a resolve he hadn't known he could summon. Training intensified. But this was no ordinary dojo. It was the city itself. Every rooftop became a platform, every shadow a potential threat. Ryu moved with precision, learning to read the rhythm of danger, to feel the momentum of his own body as a weapon, to anticipate, evade, and strike. Pain was constant. Mistakes were brutal. Bruises blossomed like dark flowers on his arms, his ribs, his legs. Yet each setback forged a deeper resilience point. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Hiroshi asked him a question that cut to the heart of everything. Do you still fear them? Ryu paused, feeling the tremor of anxiety. His first instinct was to deny it, but he had learned honesty through struggle. Yes, he admitted. Hiroshi's eyes softened. Good. Fear is not weakness. Fear is awareness. The Bujinkan teaches you to embrace it, to let it guide you rather than control you. But you must go beyond the fear you feel for them. You must face the fear within you, the fear of yourself. The words echoed in Ryu's mind long after the conversation ended. That night, he sat alone in his small apartment, shadows stretching across the walls, the hum of the city like a constant drumbeat. He realized how much he had carried all his life, guilt for the mistakes he had made, sorrow for the losses he couldn't undo, rage at his own inadequacy. Fear had been layered over it all, suffocating and insistent. He couldn't fight the syndicate yet, but he could fight himself. That became his nightly ritual, sitting in silence, confronting the storm inside, moving through the physical and mental exercises the dojo had instilled. Every breath, every stance, every movement was a conversation with his fear. Days later, the first attack came. It was subtle at first, footsteps behind him in a dim street, shadows shifting with unnatural precision, eyes that tracked him from the corners. Ryu's body moved before his mind could catch up, a reflex honed by countless hours of training. He ducked, rolled, and struck in fluid motions, disarming the first attacker silently and efficiently. Heart pounding, adrenaline screaming, he realized the truth: fear had sharpened him. It had made him alive in ways he hadn't felt before. But the fight wasn't over. More came, faster and stronger, testing his limits. Each one brought new challenges, unpredictability, cunning, and the raw force of their intent. Ryu's movements became a dance of precision and instinct. Every strike, every step, every parry was a conversation with the lessons of the dojo, with his own body, with the fear that had once controlled him. Between battles, he found moments of reflection. The city was quiet then, the neon fading to whispers, the rain coating the streets like a veil. He thought of his father's words again. Control your fear, and nothing can touch you. But now he understood them differently. Control wasn't domination or suppression. Control was recognition, acceptance, and the courage to move forward anyway. Yet, despite progress, doubt crept in. One night, Ryu sat on a rooftop overlooking the city, rain soaking him, and asked himself, Am I strong enough? Am I ready to protect those I love? Or will fear still betray me? A shadow moved beside him. Hiroshi had joined silently. Without a word, he placed a hand on Ryu's shoulder. The gesture was simple, yet it carried reassurance. You're ready, Hiroshi said quietly. But remember, fear is never gone. It's part of the path. The question is not whether you feel it, but whether you let it guide you to strength or paralyze you into weakness. Ryu nodded, a fire igniting inside. He understood now, the journey was not about eliminating fear, it was about transformation. Every drop of doubt, every pang of panic, every memory of loss was fuel. And he would use it, not against others, but to become unshakable, to rise above the shadows that had haunted him for so long. But as he stood there, looking out over the city, another message arrived on his phone. This one wasn't from Hiroshi. It was from an unknown number, and the words were stark and unyielding. "We're closer than you think, Ryu. One wrong move, and everything ends." The words made the air heavy, suffocating. Fear surged, but this time, it was different. This time, he recognized it, felt it, and let it anchor him instead of breaking him. Ryu clenched his fists. A storm of adrenaline, focus, and calm determination washed through him. He had trained for this, not just to fight, but to survive, to master, to become more than fear itself. The city held its breath, and in that silence, Ryu made a choice. He would confront the threat directly. He would meet danger head-on, armed with skill, instinct, and the unyielding knowledge that fear was not his enemy, but his teacher. And deep down, he knew that the coming hours would test everything he had become. Every lesson learned, every drop of sweat shed in the dojo, every moment of silence confronting his inner demons, it all led to this. The first shadows of his enemies were already moving in the alleyways. Ryu's heart beat steady. His body was ready. His mind was sharp. And for the first time, fear no longer felt like a cage. It was a guide, a weapon, a force that would push him beyond limits he hadn't yet imagined. The night was far from over. The true test was about to begin. The night had thickened into a velvet shadow that swallowed the streets whole. The city seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Every distant siren, every flicker of neon, every rustle in a dark alley felt amplified, charged with tension. Ryu moved silently, feet pressing against wet concrete, senses taut, every instinct honed through months of relentless Bujinkan training. Fear was there, but now it was a tool, a compass pointing him toward life or death, not a chain around his heart. He had tracked the syndicate to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Its windows were broken, doors hanging on rusted hinges, the interior shrouded in darkness except for thin slivers of moonlight cutting through the cracks. Ryu could feel them inside, dozens of men, armed, organized, confident in their control. They didn't know he had changed. They didn't know that fear had stopped ruling him. Ryu took a deep breath, recalling every lesson the dojo had carved into him. His father's voice, the master's guidance, Hiroshi's encouragement, they were all within him, fused into instinct. Every step forward was deliberate. Every breath was calm. The first wave of attackers came suddenly, spilling from the shadows. Ryu didn't hesitate. His movements were fluid, precise, almost like water flowing around obstacles. Each strike neutralized the threat without wasted energy. Blocks and counters, rolls and strikes, all executed in a seamless rhythm taught only by relentless discipline and fear faced head-on. Pain came, as it always did, but he moved through it, unbroken. One attacker lunged from behind. Ryu spun, the force of his motion striking the man down, and using his momentum to propel himself to safety. Another came from the left. Ryu anticipated the movement, sidestepping and leveraging his weight to bring the man crashing into crates. Every action was guided by awareness, not anger. Every moment of fear was translated into clarity. Hours, or perhaps minutes, it was impossible to measure, passed in a blur of motion and silence. When the last of the syndicate members had been subdued, Ryu stood amid the wreckage of crates and broken shadows. He wasn't unscathed. Bruises, cuts, and exhaustion were etched on his body. But something remarkable had shifted. Fear no longer controlled him. The storm inside, which once paralyzed him, now surged as energy he could command. He lowered himself to the floor, breathing heavily, feeling the rhythm of life in his chest. His hands, still trembling, carried no anger, only the quiet satisfaction of a battle survived and a fear conquered. Then came a sound that stopped him cold, a faint whisper behind the crates. Hiroshi emerged, bruised but alive. Relief flooded Ryu's chest. "You did it," Hiroshi said, voice rough with emotion. You really did it." Ryu shook his head, feeling a complex mix of exhaustion, triumph, and humility. "We did it. he corrected. I couldn't have done it alone. Every lesson, every failure, every moment of fear, it brought me here. For the first time in years, Ryu allowed himself to look inward with something other than shame or dread. Fear had been relentless, unforgiving, consuming. But facing it, step by step, had transformed it. The Bujinkan System had given him more than self-defense. It had given him mastery over his own mind and body, the ability to act when paralyzed by doubt, to stand when overwhelmed by despair. In the days that followed, the city seemed less hostile. Ryu walked its streets with awareness, not arrogance, but with a calm rooted in experience. Every shadow no longer whispered threats, it spoke lessons. He met friends and strangers with a quiet confidence, no longer running from connection, no longer avoiding life because of invisible chains. But the true revelation came in silence. One evening, alone on the dojo rooftop, Ryu gazed at the horizon where the city lights merged with the last hues of twilight. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of damp earth and renewal. He thought of every failure, every bruise, every tear he had shed. And he understood, fear was never meant to be destroyed, it was meant to be known, honored, and transformed. It was a mirror, reflecting weakness, yes, but also potential. Courage was not the absence of fear, courage was the act of moving forward despite it. His phone buzzed. A message from his mother. I'm proud of you, Ryu. I see the strength in you now. Ryu's chest tightened with a mixture of love, guilt, and gratitude. He had carried fear like a shadow for years, letting it dictate his life. Now, he had turned it into light, a guiding force, not a cage. He realized that the fight had never been about defeating others. It had been about defeating the versions of himself that hid behind doubt, that ran from possibility, that allowed fear to control the narrative of his life. Hiroshi joined him on the rooftop, sitting silently. No words were necessary. Together, they watched the city breathe, feel its pulse, and witnessed the quiet resilience that existed everywhere, an echo of the transformation Ryu had undergone. Do you feel it? Hiroshi asked finally. Ryu nodded. I do. The fear is still there. But I am not its prisoner anymore. I can feel it, I can move with it, and I can choose my own path. Hiroshi smiled faintly. Then you are truly free. The Bujinkan does not remove fear, Ryu. It teaches you how to become larger than it. Ryu looked out at the city once more. He could feel the heartbeat of life, the endless possibilities stretching ahead. The memories of loss, guilt, and doubt were still there, but they no longer weighed him down, they were fuel. He had learned to move through fear, to harness it, to let it guide him towards strength, not paralysis. And in that moment he understood the truth. The fight against fear was not a battle that ended. It was a lifelong practice, a discipline that required courage every day. But it was also a journey that offered something extraordinary, the realization that strength, resilience, and freedom were always within reach, if only one had the courage to confront the shadows inside. Ryu took a slow breath, feeling the pulse of life in his chest, the rain now replaced by a gentle breeze that carried promise. He had faced the storm, faced himself, and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. Fear had become his teacher, his guide, his ally. And with it, he knew he could face anything. The city stretched before him, endless and unpredictable. The shadows whispered, but this time, Ryu smiled. They no longer intimidated him. They reminded him of how far he had come. And as he descended from the rooftop, stepping into the streets that once felt like traps, he carried a truth stronger than any weapon. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is standing up, again and again, with fear beside you, and choosing to move forward anyway. The world would always challenge him. Danger would always lurk. Doubt would always whisper. But now, he knew he had everything he needed to meet it. Because he had mastered the one thing that truly matters, himself. And in that mastery, he had destroyed the power fear once held over him.